Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Scube TV. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Jake Tonkel. He is running for City Council from District 6 in San City. So, welcome to the show, Mr. Jake. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me. Exciting to be on.
Thank you for coming. And we'd like to know a little bit more about yourself. What you've been doing before getting into the politics, and what made you to get into the politics and also run for the city council.
Yeah, so I grew up not far from San Jose, about 15 minutes up the mountain, and took my career path as an engineer for a while. So I graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York, and I spent the last couple of years working in the healthcare industry, developing things right now, minimally invasive surgical equipment, and in the past, worked on some energy generator stators. It's been all over the place. What really started to change my transition into politics was taking off a couple of years and going and working in the Peace Corps over in Morocco, about 3 hours east of Marrakesh, doing community development work. It ranged from working with Engineers Without Borders on water and road access projects to HIV/AIDS awareness, to environmental health, art, chess, teaching English. It was a role that I felt and that we were trained to do: come in and talk about what's important to the community and then see how you could make that happen. That's the same thing that I see missing in local politics. The reason I decided to run is we're in a spot where, especially, a city council, a school board seat, something like this, is a stepping stone to higher office for many people. And I wanted to bring the focus back to how we impact the community, because 95% of what happens in your daily life is taken care of under your municipality. A lot of people focus on the President of the United States. They focus on their state senators and everything that happens in DC. And often it gets forgotten how much work really happens here, right in your backyard. Those two things merged to me around the divestment movement. I was very involved in environmental justice work and then social justice work coming back from Morocco. And all of it started to roll into finance for me. We took a look at municipal budgets and decided that if your budget wasn't reflective of the values in your community, you weren't going to tackle some of these major issues like the climate crisis, our prison industrial complex here in the United States or in California. And so there's a lot of steps that cities take to influence what happens even on that state and national scale. And I wanted to see more of that from the city of San Jose.
Got you. Okay, good to hear. You've been from the bioengineering field and coming to the politics, and also right now the biomedical or engineering is also very important aspect of the life because of the pandemic and all the diseases right now happening in the world. So coming back to the San Jose is such a city which is has like high-end companies, and the economy is always booming. I don't see very rarely. The economy has gone down in that area. Even though the impact is I would say, relatively less compared to the other parts of the US. So when it comes to the any slowdown in the economy or anything, so at the same time we see a lot of the cost of living is also very high. And when the cost of living is high, not many people are able to have a decent life in San Jose. If they have to work, they cannot live in San Jose. They have to travel at least an hour or hour and a half from suburbs of that area, and then work here and then go back. So with all these things, what do you see as if you are elected the council member? So what do you see why is it, the affordability in San Jose is so less, and what changes would you like to bring in?
It really stems from our, I would say, housing bubble, right? You mentioned the economy in general, but even during COVID-19, we see home prices still on the rise, rent is still on the rise, where technically the economy, Wall Street's not doing well. Wall Street's doing great, but the economy is not going into a downturn. And so that divide of the haves and the have-nots really keeps that housing bubble a housing bubble and consolidates wealth as more and more of the same people buy up a third, a fourth, a fifth property. Especially these large corporations continue to buy up land. The city of San Jose just sold a bunch of land to Google, one of the most profitable companies in the world, that is now going to come in, and we're expecting them to take care of everything, to build housing, to build storefronts, etc. And as we continue to sell off public assets like land to these large companies, we lose the ability for us to shape policy in a way that allows every type of person, every worker to be able to afford to live here. The key difference in the next couple of years is really going to be how we address that affordable housing piece and how we address wages. The city of San Jose has 4 low-income jobs for every 1 low-income housing unit, which, as you rightly pointed out, forces people to commute from hours away, spend less time with their families, not be able to coach sports, etc. Like that impacts quality of life as well, even if they've found somewhere to live that is affordable to them. So we're not escaping the problem by pushing people out of the city of San Jose either. We're just changing what the problem looks like a little bit. As we look at other cities in the area, San Jose is one of the only cities and the only major city that doesn't require on-site affordable housing on all new projects. We have what's termed an opt-out fee or an in lieu of fee, which I think has really hurt us over the last couple of years. We've been seeing every new development come in at 100% market rate, which is inherently unaffordable to most families, as our affordable housing segments cover anything up to 120% of the area median income. So we're not just pushing out our low-income workers, but we're pushing out our middle-class workers as well. People making $80K, $110K a year still don't have that affordability for San Jose. And it all ends up getting baked into the economics of our city, right? We have these fees for a reason. The negative externality, the negative consequence of building luxury apartment complexes is that it raises rents all over the surrounding area and brings in those that are wealthy to, again, raise rent. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we want to make San Jose a place to live, we have to start to really be strict on our affordability requirements as we continue to build up.
That's hopefully something will change, and then there will be some changes in the laws, and then we will be able to increase the affordability of housing and the rents and in that area. Another important thing in the Bay Area, and especially California, is the education is another topic which is also very hot. So a few school districts are doing good, and some school districts are not doing good, and San Jose is one among them. It's okay, but not that great. So what do you say, what is your say on those improving the quality of education in San Jose school districts?
So it's changing in the way that our school districts function and fund themselves, because we're now looking at a district like District 6 in San Jose, which has a very high median home value, which are generally connected to high-performing public schools in the area. And we don't necessarily see that. While we have some great schools, they tend to be our low-income families that are sending their kids to public schools, and the other families are choosing to go to private school or to charter schools in that space. So we've got to start to focus on investment in our public education so that there isn't a need to go to a private school, that the school that's around the corner that is public and works for people of all incomes is high performing. And one of the first pieces for that is for us to pass, I believe it's Prop 15 that's going to be on the November ballot, Schools and Communities First. It plugs into that inequity piece that we mentioned, across San Jose and across Silicon Valley, where there are companies that have bought land, decades ago, paying less in taxes than my neighbor who just bought their house in $20. And so as we look at ways that we're funding our community, we can't be trying to grab everything from the middle income, from the lower income folks. We have to look to these billion-dollar and almost trillion-dollar profitable companies and make them pay their fair share, right? When the property taxes were set for what was Prop 13, when it was in place, it was about 50% of the funds coming from commercial land and 50% of the funds coming from private land, homeowners. Now it's been totally skewed, where almost 65% of the funding comes from private individuals, families, and only 35% comes from these corporations and commercial spaces. So we need to get that back to 50-50, and what it's going to do is bring billions of dollars into the state economy and locally to our schools and municipalities.
Okay. That's probably one way to increase the revenue for school funding. That's a school, to take care of the schools. Right? But the other side, if you look at it, companies, many of the companies are moving out of the Bay Area because of the cost and the policies and all those things. So when you try to increase more, so don't you think, will it be countereffective in pushing away the jobs from that area?
I think you have two sides of that equation, because we're still talking about land value, right? On some of the most profitable land, it's the best investment you could make. That's why we have the housing market that we do. Is land in Silicon Valley is extremely valuable. So unless they want to then sell that land off, sell it back to people that either local governments that can use it for affordable housing or other projects, then they can perhaps reallocate workforces, but they're still going to be in that space where the tax revenue is coming into us. On the workforce side, though, we also know that that's not happening. There's going to be people that are going to be now able to work from home, and that may change the demographic of Silicon Valley slightly over the next couple of years, potentially drastically over the next 30 or 40 years. But in the short term, we've got amazing universities in Silicon Valley, San Jose State, Santa Clara, Stanford, all the way up to Cal. And that workforce, that educated workforce, draws a lot of the companies here. We also just simply have startup culture. We've learned now that our large companies, the ones that we look to as job creators, aren't really coming out with new products all the time. They're usually acquiring these small startups, like companies I've worked for, that all stem from where this venture funds are, stem from where kids are going to school. Our CEO is not going to pick up and move our company just because he wants to move his family to somewhere that's cheaper. This is their community. And so having these small startups that know they're a piece of the community, they're a piece of the culture, continues to draw the workforce from our larger companies here. And so I really don't see them going anywhere in the long run unless something changes on that end.
Gotcha. That's a good one. And another thing in the Bay Area, what we have seen is one side we have the rich companies and high-paying jobs, and then the multi-million-dollar houses and those kind of things. And at the same time, you also see many homeless people on the streets. So even San Francisco and LA are also the largest cities, where you have more number of homeless people. But I'm sure even San Jose has its own share of homeless people. So what do you think, your views and the homelessness, and then what do you think the government should do as a city council? What measures will you be suggesting?
So that is the crux of where we're at here. While we have these profitable companies, they generally come in and will contract out for very low wages to more of the service industry in the community. Our chefs, our security guards, etc., people that come in and aren't the engineers and the executives on a daily basis. And that gap continues to grow and grow, which puts more and more families at risk of becoming unhoused. Right? While we were able to house, I think, like 700 or 800 people last year, we still grew in the number of people living on our streets. And that's that affordability and wages piece that's so important if we're going to tackle the inequity in our community, but also homelessness. Right? Majority of people that are unhoused, their prior residence was Santa Clara County. Many of them simply didn't have enough to afford rent. I think it's like 78% of folks, when surveyed, lost their place because they could not afford to pay the rent at the end of the day. We do have issues with mental health care, and those need to be addressed. So there needs to be investment in social and mental health, but it is primarily an affordability issue for us in the community. That's why in lieu of fees need to be reduced and wages need to be improved. Looking at a living wage for Santa Clara County being $22.30 an hour, and minimum wage for the city of San Jose being $15.25. So you're still only 65-70% of the way to a living wage here in the community. I think there is a really important metric that we have to focus on, though, when we're talking about helping people that are on the street today. And that's where we're allocating funds and how reactionary we're currently being. As it stands, we spend about $520 million per year on our unhoused community. Only 13% of that cost is social work. The majority goes to policing and jail and emergency room fees. So we're just leaving people on the street and not providing health or social services, and it turns out it costs us a lot more money. For every chronically unhoused individual, we spend about $62,000 per year. And again, that same breakdown: 13% for social work, 35% for policing and jail, and about 45% for emergency room and healthcare costs. And when we, regardless of that person's mental health status, job status, family status, marital status, etc., if we house them, that $62,000 cost goes down to about $19,000. Save about 40, well, my math's going off on me here, but like $43,000, $44,000 a year just by housing someone. That's regardless of substance abuse. It's getting them into a place where we can recognize and be preventative about the health and social services that they receive. It ends up being best for the individual and best for the community as well.
Gotcha. That's a good proposal. I mean, that's what many other, even state level also is trying to work on housing them, and other Congress people who are running for the Congress, they're also requesting and proposing these kind of solutions, which hopefully things will work out for the homeless people, and less number of people will be on the streets, and they will. And especially California has been in the news for the last few days. And of course, it's always been there in the news, but recently the coronavirus has been another hot topic in the California, because it's initially they blunted the curve, and off late again last few weeks, the numbers are going up. So how is the situation in the San Jose area?
It's starkly changing over time. We're looking at cases now that are going up all over the city, but as we saw very early on, COVID has really impacted our low-income communities and our communities of color the most. Within my district, over the first, I think, 2 months, we only had 6 cases in the zip codes that I would represent, where there were hundreds of cases on the east side of the city, mostly, our Latinx community, people that are the essential workers. They're at grocery stores, they're cleaning, they're healthcare workers, etc. And that's affected their ability to shelter in place, to keep them and their family safe. It's that divide is showing up because it was already here. right? We have that inequity across the community, across the city, as we talked about in our affordability, in our wages, et cetera. It's just been exacerbated through the COVID-19 emergency. And then we continue to see how unprepared we are to require from companies what needs to be done to keep us safe. I spent a few hours last week out front Good Samaritan Hospital, where nurses are trying to demand people to help them take care of their shifts, sick pay, protective equipment, etc. And this hospital, Healthcare Corporation of America, which is this giant conglomerate with billions in profits, has decided that they're going to cut staffing, that they're going to force masks to be reworn, etc., so that they can continue to be profitable through an economic downturn. And it's only going to end up making our second wave even more damaging, both to our healthcare workers and to our community, because you're not going to get the same protection when you really need it. So as we advocate for people to certainly stay home, but also rental assistance, the city of San Jose had a few $1 million in rental assistance that disappeared on the very first day of the pandemic. Right? We're going to have almost 47,000 people are expected to be at risk of eviction as soon as our eviction moratorium ends, because they've not been required to pay rent, but there is nothing on the books that says if you don't pay rent back 100% in full, you cannot be evicted in the future. And so we're looking at this same problem that's going to exacerbate itself as we kick people out onto the street, or force them to go live in closer quarters with a neighbor or another family member that's perhaps working because they have been removed from the safe space they were in. We have to really stand up for that aspect of our community that's going to struggle through this.
Gotcha. Okay, and this pandemic is also creating another problem, economy. Big corporations may survive, and they are, mostly the IT, they are able to survive. They're getting the work done through the remotely or work from home, so that's fine. But when you look at the small businesses like the coffee shops or the restaurants or the grocery, any of the retail outlets, they're all struggling. All over the world. Not only in San Jose, all over the world. With these things, I'm sure the revenue of the city is going to go down. And when the revenue goes down, so it is another challenge. You need to provide the quality services to the citizens of the city, and also the schools and all those things. And on the other side, you have the revenues going down, and you will not be able to do the more of the police ticketings because of the situation. You need to be a little generous and taking care of the citizens. And also, if somebody is not keeping up their house very well, you will not. I've been talking to other mayors and the city council people, and they've been saying that I will not be able to give them a ticket or a fine. For not keeping up their lawn well, or not able to. Some cities, they even say that they are not even forcing their citizens to pay the water bills. So even if they're not able to pay the water bills, they have to, go wait for a few months. So with all these things, what do you think? I'm sure this is going to be a big challenge. If you are to get elected, balancing the budget and giving the services and generating more revenue. So what do you think? What do you think of all these things?
It is absolutely going to be a challenge, and I think focus on that. Even though we're going to have to pull back on some of the holistic perspectives, we still have to take a holistic economic view and know that where are we going to get the best return on our investment. Small businesses being one of them. They account for a huge percentage of the workforce in our city and the revenue generated through sales tax. We have to figure out how we're going to fund them, whether it's small business loans that have 0% interest that come from the city and are paid back over the next 5-10 years, or whether it's simply just like we might do for renters, making sure we're providing rental assistance to these spaces. Again, many of our small businesses do not own the land that they are on, and as we can pause rent for renters and pause rent for businesses, we're going to allow them to shelter in place successfully so that we can escape kind of the second wave if we do it properly and get people back to work more quickly than if what we've seen now, we try and open up too early and we didn't have the proper protections in place for those small businesses from the get-go. It's really going to struggle. I think we also have to start to be creative in how we do municipal finance. We had council member Sergio Jimenez, he's just been reelected to District 2, was talking about how we leverage billions, $8 billion in pensions that we have at the city, that's not the general fund, so that we can do those loans, right? As we look at time value of money through an economic downturn, we know that if we can pump money into the economy now, we're going to be better off in the next year, better off in the next 5 years. And if we know those pensions are going to be around for 30 or 40 years, because that's when our employees are set to retire, et cetera, we can build smart payback plans for our community that not only boost the economy now, but get us to an even stronger point 30 years down the road, and a more resilient point at that. As we look to get, because 2008, city of San Jose was hit with an economic downturn, right? Just like the rest of the world. And we tightened our belt, and it was just like last year that we're like, all right, the economy's doing well, let's start investing in some of these programs that we know have positive returns for our community, whether it's art that has a positive ROI, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's addressing our unhoused community, whether it's first 0 to 5 year old child education. They all have positive long-term, 10, 20, 30 year returns that we decided just not to do because we were skeptical about how we were going to come out of an economic downturn. We can't have that same mistake, right? We have to, as a local government, as a state government, and then whatever is going to go on at the federal level, because that is a huge challenge in and of itself to know what they are going to do. We have to look at what we can change here so that we can get those funds to people. And so there's also a bill that a couple of groups are working on going through the state house right now, AB 310, which is a state bank, essentially doing kind of what I just talked about through the municipal pensions, but taking a piece of the state budget, putting it into the iBank or the infrastructure bank, and then loaning it out to municipalities so that we have that same ability to invest and then pay back the state over the next 10 or 15 years. It's something we're working closely with Assembly Member Ash Kalra, who covers a good portion of San Jose, as well as quite a few others, to get it passed this year. It has quite the potential to be an economic stimulus package for San Jose specifically, but the entire state as well.
Gotcha. Good to hear all these initiatives going on in the back end at the state level and the city level, and hopefully things will again work out for the citizens and the governments and the governments at the local level and state level. During this pandemic, we have one side we have economic crisis, another side we have on the social issue which has come up, and it is just like a wildfire. It has been caught up in many cities, and the Black Lives Matter. So, started in Minneapolis, and now, it's almost every major city has this movement going on. So, what is your views on Black Lives Matter movement?
We should simply start by saying Black Lives Matter, right? And that, as I look to take it on a campaign that is focused on equity, racial equity is a huge piece of that, right? And as we've seen, called out in city after city, our communities of color have been, marginalized, pushed into extreme despair through systematic racism, things that we have decided just not to bother to look at, much less fix on a local level or a community-based level. And that has to change. One of the major aspects of this is how are we investing in our Black and brown communities in San Jose or across the state? Truth is, we don't. We take maybe $1 million of $1 billion budget and try and put it towards programs that effectively raise up communities of color and our low-end communities in the city of San Jose. It's a drop in the bucket, and then we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on punitive measures. We spend almost $50,000 per juvenile. $500,000 in Santa Clara County per juvenile that's in detention center, rather than take that same $500,000 and give it to an educational system that could help 20, 30, 100, 200 kids. It's time for us to start to refocus how that gets spent. Right? We need educational systems to be strong. We need family support systems to be strong, and we need options for students that don't fit into this traditional mold that's our education system built from, to be honest, a white supremacist demographic of people, right? Their test scores, et cetera. It's why we see the Cal universities doing away with the SAT, and knowing how racially biased and that program is, through the equity that it takes families to hire a tutor, make sure that they're focused on applying to the right school. All of those things matter in this racial disparity that we see. And I'm extremely excited that Black Lives Matter is finally getting into the living rooms of people that were not paying attention 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Because again, it's not new. We've been doing this for almost the entire existence of the United States of America, but we continue to not talk about what the solutions are. And as we listen to the organizers, their solutions are invest in us, stop punishing us, stop putting us in prison, stop pushing punitive measures, and start using more of a carrot approach. City of San Jose has not planned to do that, like some other cities which have decided to invest in Black and brown businesses, move money into educational funds, etc. But it's something we really need to do.
Gotcha. Okay. And one last question for the day today from your side. I'm sure there are many other points, but we'll come back another day. But for today, so you're running against an incumbent. Miss Davis. So what is that she's missing, and what are you trying to say? How are you different from her? How is your approach is different from her approach?
So just the way that we look at local community economics is fairly different. Whether we're talking about housing, small businesses, wages, etc., Deb takes a fairly conservative approach, more of a traditional trickle-down economics approach. Let's make sure we're subsidizing our largest corporations, making sure we're giving tax breaks to developers to come build luxury housing, and that's going to, as we do enough of that, it's going to make life easier for those at the bottom eventually. And I just simply don't see the world that way. And I don't, honestly, economics doesn't see the world that way. As you invest in your low wages in the community, as you invest in people, you get positive returns for the wealth of the city and the wealth of the surrounding community as well. You spend less money, again, on punitive measures, and more money on arts and culture and education when you take the approach that says, you want to be a part of our community, come in, pay your fair share, and we're all going to be better off for it. We had just November of last year, a majority of city council, it was a 6-5 vote, essentially gave away $65 million in subsidies to for-profit luxury apartment developers for our downtown core, because those companies came in and said, we're not going to get enough profit. It wasn't we are going to get zero profit. It was we don't get the profit that we want, we're going to walk. And $65 million is a lot of money to give to people that are already doing really well, especially when we have nonprofit affordable housing developers that with the right package and understanding from the city can build affordable housing that will meet the needs of the community rather than luxury housing. And so Dev thought it was more important that we get that investment and waive their affordable housing fees, waive their kind of traffic fees, waive their parks fees. What that ends up doing is putting all that money onto the back of taxpayers, right? When home values go up, or when parks get overcrowded and understaffed, when our roads get damaged from construction, now the city has to come in and pay for that, instead of making that part of the package that says you come in, you're going to create these negative consequences in our community. We're asking you to mitigate those consequences. And so I tend to take a more holistic approach to the economic space as well, and then focus on how that intersects with our social justice issues, because they're absolutely intertwined. I mean, everything in policy is related to economics, which is related to social justice, and we don't see that conversation coming out of the District 6 office right now. As we're looking at major issues, even last year, an unhoused crisis, an affordable housing crisis, a global climate crisis, the priorities that were brought from District 6 were increase certification requirements for pet groomers and provide the opportunity for people to sell their gas leaf blowers to the city, get a voucher so that they can buy an electric leaf blower. We had the opportunity to talk about understaffed city government. We had the opportunity to talk about art. We had the opportunity to talk about affordable housing. We had the opportunity to push a countless number of vastly important issues, both to District 6 and to the city of San Jose, through that priority setting. And instead we got things that were just small pieces of what we need to do to make District 6 and San Jose a livable place for everybody.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And do you have any message or view? I mean, any to your constituents or viewers here?
I would just want to say, please make sure you're registered. We are 99 days away from Election Day. There are always issues that go on through, the registrar of voters. Make sure your address is up to date, etc. Because how we move forward together as a community is making sure every voice is heard. That has to start with elections. We have a good turnout historically in District 6, but we should always be striving for 100% voter turnout. And it's something we're not there yet. If you have questions for me, please visit my website, jake4d6.com. That's the number 4, letter D, number 6. It's got phone, email, social media. Follow us, ask questions. I'd be happy to talk more later on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jake Tonkel, for coming on the show and sharing your views. And we wish you all the best in the elections. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a nice rest of the evening. Thank you.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you.